Can we get it out of the way or no?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Oh, okay, good. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, and sorry, for my late. I wasn't channeling my Marilyn Monroe lateness thing, so this was entirely unintentional. But thank you all for joining us today for this webinar on Oregon's bottle bill. My name is Chicago Crosby, and I'm calling from Brooklyn, New York. Where I work as a canner and have been for the last, let's say it's 10 years now, I believe. And what I mean by that is I collect cans and bottles for deposits through the New York bottle bill system. I deposit those cans and bottles at Sure We Can, which is a canner-run redemption center and advocacy organization. Today, we are going to hear from some other canners and dumpster divers in Portland, Oregon, yay, who are here to tell you about their experience with Oregon's bottle bill. And we're so impressed by that. We want to find out what it is and how you guys did it. And we will also hear about how their local government is working to create a more inclusive waste management system. If you have any questions during the presentation, please enter them into the chat. I'm sorry. Please enter them into the chat and we will answer them at the end. This webinar is going to have a little bit of a different format. We will start things off with ground score coordinator Taylor Cass Talbert explaining Oregon's bottle bill. Then she is going to interview her colleagues and fellow canners, Latrice Holloway and Barbie Weber. So I will turn things over to the three of them now. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Chicago. And I just want to remind everybody on the call, if you haven't noticed, we do have interpretation on this call today. So down at the bottom of your Zoom screen, there should be a little globe and you can select your language there. Eduardo, and I quickly, before I get started, I wanted to pass things to Eduardo from the Global Alliance of Waste Pickers to see if he has any quick comments before we get started. Eduardo?
Hi, everyone. Welcome to our fourth webinar of the EPR series. My name is Eduardo. I work with the communications team for Globalrec, the Global Alliance of Waste Speakers. And this is part of a global campaign that we're doing to raise awareness for the EPR and the importance of waste speakers in the whole system. So we've been discussing with professionals, experts, waste speakers, organizations, several case studies to understand how we can do it in a way that waste speakers have a much more important role than they already have. So I want to thank everyone who's here today to listen, to ask questions, to talk to us, and also the panelists. And we can just kick it off and start it. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Eduardo. So I will start with an overview of the bottle bill system. Let me just share my screen real quick here. Okay, well, thanks so much for participating in our webinar today. I wanted to start real quick, since there are several ground score workers, myself included, who are participating in this webinar. I wanted to pass things over to Barbie Weber, one of our ground score coordinators, to read our mission of Ground Score Association for those who are not aware. Barbie?
Good morning. Ground Score is an association of informal recyclers, dumpster divers, and other environmental workers who create and fill low-barrier waste management jobs. Ground Score is collectively organized and seeks to be radically inclusive, prioritizing work opportunities for those facing work and housing insecurity. Ground Score seeks to build a more environmentally and socially aware community while also changing society's perception of what and who is considered valuable. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Barbie. And Ground Score is currently registered as a project of a local organization, a nonprofit organization called Trash for Peace. And we're working towards kind of more democratic structures to eventually form something like a cooperative, perhaps. So that's a little bit of background on our work. And I'll get into a little bit why we care so much about Oregon's bottle bill here. So today we are going to be talking about Oregon's bottle bill system. This bottle bill system was actually the first in the United States, and it's one of less than a dozen bottle bills in the United States. A bottle bill is essentially a deposit return system on beverage containers. What does that mean? It means when you go to the grocery store and you buy a beverage in a package, in packaging, a packaged beverage, you pay a 10-cent deposit on that beverage. And then when you consume the beverage and want to take that empty container back to a designated location, you get that 10 cents back. So that's kind of the basic premise of this system. Why does GroundScore care so much about this system? Well, one interesting aspect of it is that it puts a monetary price on beverage containers like plastic bottles, aluminum cans, and glass bottles. And so this has given access to informal recyclers, waste pickers, to be able to collect these materials and return them for money. And locally here and across the United States, these workers are called canners. The bottle bill really arose out of challenges that we saw after World War II, through the 1960s, as the economy was strengthening and as materials were less needed for wartime purposes and, became more available for packaging purposes. And so, even though at the time there was a deposit already existent on glass bottles that could be returned for washing and reuse, there wasn't a deposit on other types of materials like aluminum cans. And so, oftentimes these materials were ending up in the environment. And environmentalists and other citizens were very concerned about this. And so there were cries from the public to revert back to reusable materials, or to at least make producers, or the companies that were producing these containers and these beverages, to pay for the recovery of these materials one way or another. There was a lot of resistance from producers to do this, right? They didn't want to incur the cost or the hassle of having to manage these systems. And so there were a number of strategies that they employed to try to undermine the bottle bill, as well as other policies that were coming up across the country to try to reform, and revert back to reusable packaging. And one of those strategies that was popular and common both across the United States as well in Oregon was for producers to invest in the mobilization of volunteers, of citizen volunteers for the cleanup of litter, kind of in the hopes that, if there wasn't as much litter in the environment, people would stop trying to rally for bottle bills and other types of extended producer responsibility legislation and policies, that might incur costs on producers. And so here at the bottom, you can see one advertisement, get involved now, pollution hurts all of us. Obviously, this is an example of, cultural appropriation in our history in the United States, but they were really kind of rallying as many, this is from Keep America Beautiful, which is a national organization that was started by producers to mobilize volunteers around litter collection. But these strategies were also employed in Oregon, where producers were investing in volunteer cleanups, in part, in some ways, through a local organization called Solve. But in Oregon, these strategies were not totally successful. And in 1971, Oregon's bottle bill was passed. And like I said, it was the first bottle bill in the United States. A little bit more history. So in 2011, the bottle bill was expanded, and this allowed multiple distributors to form a private cooperative. And that cooperative ended up being ultimately the Oregon Beverage Recycling Cooperative, which is a cooperative of producers that basically implements the bottle bill system. It serves 96% of beverage dealers in Oregon, and it manages, really all aspects of the system in a way, or most aspects of the system, including transportation and processing of materials. It also runs the only redemption centers, and redemption centers being places where you take your empty cans and bottles back. It runs the only redemption centers outside of retailers or grocery stores, right? And it also runs some of the redemption centers that are inside grocery stores. A little bit of kind of logistics on how this system works. So here on the left, you can see, where do the empties go? Where do the empty beverage containers go? So Oregon's consumers consume the containers, and then they take them, ideally they take them, I think according to the system, but as we know, canners also take them back to retailers or grocery stores to redeem them for money. They can also take them to the producer-run bottle drop redemption centers. And then those materials go to OBRC, right? This is the producer responsibility organization of producers that manages the system. They send those materials for recycling. And then it gets back into the beverage makers, the distributors, and back into the grocery store. So that's kind of the cycle, or the envisioned cycle of how this works. And then on the right here, you can see, where do the dimes go? And by dimes, we mean the 10 cents that is deposited when someone buys a beverage. And so basically those, the Oregon consumers pay that 10 cents to the grocery stores when they purchase their beverages. Then that dime goes to the distributors, which sends it to Oregon Beverage Recycling Cooperative. And then that money goes back to the grocery stores or the bottle drop facilities, where they can redeem, or where they can return those dimes back to consumers if the empties are returned. But if those empty containers are not returned, then those dimes stay with the Oregon Beverage Recycling Cooperative, right? It stays with the producers. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. So here's a diagram that I created just to kind of help understand, where producers are situated within the system. Oregon's bottle bill system is unique. It's a vertically integrated system, which means it's primarily privatized, meaning that it is implemented or operated by producers. And so we've represented producers here in orange, so you can see, so you can see that here again, you have the consumers as well as canners. They have their empty containers, right? They've consumed their beverage and they have their empty containers. They take them to grocery stores or the producer-run depots. Then the producers collect and process those materials for recycling. In the recycling chain, the producers also have some role in the recycling industry itself. And then of course it goes back, to the producers for the production of beverages, and then back into the grocery stores. So you can see that the role of producers in the system is very strong, and it does pose some challenges that we'll talk about. And then here you can see as well the OLCC, or the Oregon Liquor Control Commission, is the government body, the state government body that technically oversees these systems and regulates it. So this is a mandatory regulated system. Here's just a look at what redemption centers look like, a couple of models at least. So one here on the left is the producer-run bottle drop centers. And here on the right is one of the machine counting redemption locations inside a grocery store. One thing that's interesting about Oregon's bottle bill system is our convenience zone system. This is essentially designed to make it more convenient for consumers to be able to take back their empty containers. Although you can see here, and they've kind of regulated it based on whether or not a retailer or a grocery store is over 5,000 square feet or under 5,000 square feet. That helps determine how many empty containers they're required to take back. And the way this system essentially works is that you have these bottle drop facilities, these redemption centers that are run by the producers. And if you have a grocery store that is within 2 miles of a bottle drop facility, then those retailers, those grocery stores can actually they can help pay into the bottle drop facility, and that allows them to reduce the number of containers that they have to take back. And so here, these red numbers basically show how many containers each different type of retailer has to take back, dependent on their distance from a bottle drop. And when you think about it being, 10 cents per container, it's really not very, very many containers that these retailers are required to take back, right? If you're taking taking back 24 containers, that's really only $2.50 worth of bottles or cans, right? And so, I think in the ideal is that this is a convenience zone system, but what we have noticed over the years is that the number of containers that retailers are required to take back is kind of reducing, and oftentimes without real public consultation about those reductions. And so this is one major challenge that we see for canners, is that they're oftentimes having to go multiple different locations to redeem their cans in one day, even though that's not technically allowed through these systems. You're really only supposed to redeem this number of containers per day per person. And then here you can see different from the retailers. This is the number of containers that you're able to take back to these producer-run bottle drop facilities. So, if you're taking it back and you're having a machine count it, then that's 350 cans per day. If it's a hand count, right? So if you're having a human actually hand count those materials, and it's only 50 containers per day. The Oregon Beverage Recycling Cooperative, or through their bottle drop facilities, also has what's called a green bag program, and that allows generally consumers to be able to return their cans and bottles in bulk in these green bags that they purchase. So they purchase the green bag, and then there's a limit on the number of bags that they're allowed to take to the facility. So it's 15 bags every 90 days. And then they also have a blue bag program that is really oriented towards like nonprofit organizations or schools who want to conduct a fundraiser by collecting cans and bottles to earn money for whatever their cause is. And so they're obviously allowed to take much larger amounts of containers, so 10 bags per day, or even up to 50 bags at a time if they make an appointment. So you can see that, based on how many containers you're allowed to take back, it's really oriented towards encouraging, these green or blue bag systems or machine-based systems. And I will say about the green bags, as well as the blue bags, is that in order to return containers that way, you need to have an account, you need to have an ID, and you don't get your money right away. And so this is not really as appealing for canners who don't necessarily want to register into the system, and who oftentimes are wanting to get their money, right away when they return their containers. So where does income flow in Oregon's bottle bill system? I think it's always important to understand the financial flows in these systems. It's really hard to tell, and we don't have numbers. So here I've kind of tried to highlight in dark green the numbers that we more or less know because of OBRC's reporting, whereas in light green are the numbers that we don't really know so much. And I'll talk a little bit more about the transparency issues in a bit. So let's go through it. So there are some ways you can see here in the middle, the Oregon Beverage Recycling Cooperative. These are the producers and through their bottle drop facilities. So money comes to them in several ways. One way is these unredeemed deposits. So that means when a consumer buys a beverage, and then they don't end up taking the can or bottle back to a redemption center, that becomes an unredeemed deposit. And that amount of money stays with OBRC. So that becomes income for OBRC to, implement the system ideally. The stores or retailers, they also pay OBRC or the bottle drop facility if they are within that convenient zone system. So they pay basically for the management of these bottle drop facilities, which allows them to take back fewer containers. Also, something that often goes unreported or really unconsidered is the sale of the green or blue bags that consumers have to buy these bags in order to return containers. And so that is also kind of an unknown source of income for OBRC. And then finally, OBRC, because they are managing the implementation of the system and all the containers come back to them, they then sell those containers to the recycling industry. And that money, it comes back to them, but they're not required to report on how much they're earning from the sale of these materials. Now let's look at some of the expenditures that OBRC has. And again, we don't really have a good grasp on the total budget here, but we know that OBRC that the system pays government or through the OLCC, I think about $75,000 a year. I think they have 2 people in government who help to oversee and regulate these systems. OBRC also has a charity program. And so they donate to a lot of charities, oftentimes not necessarily charities that are in the waste industry or that are kind of involved in the system, although that did change this year during COVID with a redemption center called the People's Depot, which is our redemption center, and we'll share a little bit about that in the next presentation. And then finally, obviously the major expenditure for OBRC is in system operations. And then there's kind of this other arm of income that actually, and I show it going from consumers to canners, which is that, when consumers don't take their cans and bottles back, they might leave it in their recycle bin or in their garbage can or even in the street, and canners then pick up those containers to deposit. So that's a source of income for informal recyclers in Oregon. So here is a look, last year was a bit of an unusual year because of COVID-19 and very problematically, and we'll talk about this again later, the state stopped enforcing our bottle bill. And so people didn't have very many places to return their cans and bottles. And so last year was an unusual year, but I think that it shows a little bit what can kind of happen with this system, which is that last year, their OBRC made $42.49 million just from unredeemed deposits. So that's essentially consumers that couldn't return their cans and bottles or didn't return their cans and bottles. So they basically paid that money, right? Because they spent that money into the system and then they never got it back. And then OBRC also reports, almost $4 million were fees charged to their members. And so they report here that the overall budget was $46.45 million. Of course, this doesn't include other sources of income that OBRC had, like through the sale of materials for recycling or the sale of green bags. So you can see, here that we don't really get a clear picture of what the budget is. It's problematic because it just becomes hard to kind of plan and envision, how to make adjustments to this system if we don't really understand the full financial scope. But it also raises a question, we tend to consider bottle bills to be a form of extended producer responsibility, which means extending responsibility to producers, right? But I think that there is a little bit of controversy about bottle bills simply because we know that consumers also pay a lot into these systems through these unredeemed deposits. So, it's a question worth considering, is it still EPR when consumers are paying the bulk of the costs, at least in this case from last year. In 2020 was also a year that the state actually audited the bottle bill system. And they did a very extensive audit. It's online, you can find it. If you're curious to do a deeper dive into Oregon's bottle bill, there's some great history in that document. And there were a couple of recommendations that came out of that audit. One of them, was generally just to try to modernize Oregon's bottle bill system. Of course, what does that mean? A few of the recommendations that they gave were that the state may want to consider taking those unredeemed deposits rather than having those unredeemed deposits go to producers. And then they could use those funds for environmental and recycling programs. Another recommendation was to expand the bottle bill to include wine and liquor. There are still a lot of different types of beverage containers that are not included in our bottle bill that, are included in other bottle bills around the world. And as well as, the need to increase financial transparency, really to better understand what are the financial needs to run these types of systems. So this state audit and some of the recommendations that came out of it led to the establishment of a bottle bill expansion, access, and transparency work group, which just started and held its first meeting last month. One thing that I will say about this is that myself and Latrice Holloway, who's the canner you're going to hear from Next, in our presentation, we were invited to join this work group. And as far as I know, this is the first time that a canner has ever been invited to join a work group of this nature. So we're pretty excited about the prospects in Oregon for really trying to craft, a much more inclusive bottle bill system. And we really appreciate that the state, is looking at that aspect of inclusion. So some key benefits to our bottle bill system, one is that we have really high return rates in Oregon. I think it's for this reason that a lot of, other states or places around the world look to Oregon as a model in some ways, because, pre-COVID, we were getting 86% of materials back, although it's a little bit confusing and hard to know if that's the actual return rate, because Oregon, like many other states, we do have issues with cross-border returns. And what that means is that, there are some states next to us, and most specifically Washington State, which is above us, that doesn't have its own bottle bill system. But the cans and bottles there look exactly the same as the cans and bottles in Oregon. And so there is some amount of material that is coming across the border from Washington to Oregon and being returned, which definitely skews that percent. One of the ways that we were able to achieve such a high return rate is because it was written in that if the bottle bill system dropped below, I think it was 80% return rates, then they would have to up the deposit from 5 cents to 10 cents. And so we did that here in Oregon, and that actually did result in a higher return rate. So there are still some states around the country that only have a 5-cent deposit, but I think a lot of them are looking to increase that deposit to 10 cents in hopes of getting higher return rates. Another real benefit of Oregon's bottle bill system, and I would say probably bottle bill systems in general, is that, it's a separate sorted system, right? I mean, you have consumers or canners coming and they're actually submitting those materials in a segregated way rather than putting them mixed with a whole bunch of other recyclables at their curbside bin. And so this well-sorted stock of materials enables us to better be able to recycle these materials domestically in the United States. Because here, labor for sorting materials is quite expensive. And so this system, in a way, kind of relies on the free labor of consumers or canners to kind of pre-sort those materials, as they're redeeming them, as they're depositing them in a redemption center or at their home. Another cool thing about our Oregon bottle bill system is that there is some amount of glass reuse happening. There is a system to return glass bottles that will be sent to another state to be washed and reused. Although I would say it's a little bit confusing to understand how to use this system. And so our hope is that they will expand this system somewhat to be able to enable more reuse. And then finally, an obvious benefit to Oregon's bottle bill and bottle bills in general is that it does generate income for canners. It's a pretty low barrier entry point into the recycling system. And, really in the United States, there aren't very many ways anymore for informal recyclers to make money off of materials. Metal scrapping, sometimes maybe cardboard, but for the most part, materials don't have enough value here. We don't have a lot of access to recycling commercialization points. And so this is a really important source of income for informal recyclers. So challenges to inclusion in Oregon's bottle bill, we're really just analyzing this from the perspective of inclusion. And when I talk about inclusion, what I mean is, yes, the bottle bill is inclusive in a really informal way, and that canners can have access to recovering material and earning money from that through the system. But in terms of canners being able to then kind of move up in value chains within the Oregon bottle bill system, like, for example, running your own depot, or, actually being having it as employment to sort and count bottles, or, really moving into other aspects of service provision within the system, especially more formal aspects of service provision in the system. These are some of the challenges that we see to that becoming possible. And the first challenge is that it's producer operated. Oregon's bottle bill doesn't have handling fees, for example. So in some states like New York State or Maine, there are handling fees that are charged within the system that basically pays independent redemption centers, or in some cases retailer-based redemption centers, to cover the cost of their expenses for operating the system. And we don't have anything like that here in Oregon. We do have what are called redemption center fees. So those are the fees that grocery stores pay to the bottle drop or to the Oregon Beverage Recycling Cooperative to help them manage the privately run redemption centers. But those redemption center fees are not available to independent depots, for example. So there's no real way to fund like an independent bottle depot, or to be able to be involved in transportation, for example, except through the charity initiative of OBRC. And of course, there's only one example of that, which started during COVID, which is Our People's Depot, which is a depot that's run by canners and for canners. And it's currently the only depot that's not run by retailers or producers in the state. Another challenge that we see is the lack of financial, material, and organizational transparency. I think EPR in general really struggles with transparency. The financial transparency we've talked about and mentioned, and I do think that will probably be dealt with, I hope, through this work group to modernize Oregon's bottle bill. Material transparency, in the sale of materials for recycling, there's not a lot of clarity. It's also not totally clear. We know what percentage of materials are coming back to the system, but we don't actually know within that the amount that's actually being recycled. And then in terms of organizational transparency, this is also a bit challenging, because the Oregon Beverage Recycling Cooperative is a private cooperative. It's not like a government entity where you might be required to, adhere to freedom of information requirements. So you can't really audit necessarily OBRC to get information. It's not clear, for example, who sits on their board of directors or who sits in their leadership. And so, I guess for us, our experience working in the waste system is that some of our closest allies do tend to be women and people of color, because they understand some of the challenges for issues related to inclusion. And when you don't have that type of representation in leadership of organizations, it can be really difficult to make some of these types of innovative changes to promote more inclusion. So we would like to see more organizational transparency as well as representation of canners and others who are trying to promote inclusion within these boards and oversight bodies. Another challenge that we see is reduced access to redemption centers without broader consultation. Over time, we're seeing kind of a reduced number of containers that retailers are taking back. And this is posing a lot of challenges for canners. It's a lot more time, that gets spent going around and trying to find places to redeem the containers. And then finally, a real challenge that we see is just a lack of research on the impacts of canners to the system. Anecdotally, we know that canners are very important to this system, that probably a significant share of the materials being returned through the Oregon bottle bill system is coming from canners, but there has not been any research to understand, how many canners are out there, what is their material impact. So when you don't have this type of research, one, it's really challenging for canners to advocate for themselves within the system. Oftentimes canners are perceived as doing something illegal by going through people's public bins, their curbside bins, and technically it is still illegal for canners to go into most of the trash cans at the household level, or even in some cases at the public level. Although we think that might be changed locally at the city level here in Portland. But this lack of research really is, to us, a form of data injustice. We would like to see a lot more recognition and representation in research and data. So some of our recommendations for Oregon's bottle bill system, and I'll say that these recommendations came from a combination of places. One is through workshops that we have conducted on extended producer responsibility. We conducted a large one with canners here last year to really solicit some of their recommendations for how to improve the system, as well as conversations with the canners that we work with through GroundScore. GroundScore also networks with other waste picker organizations at a regional level. There are about 5 waste picker organizations in Canada and the United States. And we here in Oregon work especially closely with Sure We Can in New York. And together with Sure We Can, which has also been doing a lot of engagement on their bottle bill system because they run their own independent depot in New York. So a lot of the kind of shared recommendations have fed into this. And then finally, we also have been working in some capacity with the Global Alliance of Waste Pickers, with waste picker organizations around the world to understand, what some of their recommendations are for extended producer responsibility. And then lastly, just these recommendations are also based on our own experiences of trying to envision how our own bottle redemption center called the People's Depot, which you'll hear about now in a minute, how to make it sustainable over time. So our recommendations include, obviously we want some reservation of opportunities for canner organizations, including maybe eligibility for redemption or handling fees, some way for us or organizations like GroundScore to be able to be involved in the redemption of materials, right? So moving up in the value chain, not just, at the super informal level of canners taking materials back, but also being able to receive and process materials within the system, and to be able to provide canners with, stable, a little bit more reliable jobs in that. We would also like to see a government appointed oversight committee with representation from canners. And, since we made this recommendation, we have seen the state work group come out. And so we're excited to see what comes out of that. Of course, full financial, material, and organizational transparency we would like to see. We'd also like to see a periodic formal review process, some way for the public to really engage and have a say in our bottle bill system. Our state is super proud of this bottle bill. It was the first in the country, like I mentioned. But I think that there are a lot more opportunities for the public to be involved in whatever adjustments get made to this system over time. We would also like to see funding for independent research on the system that includes the role of canners and their contribution to the bottle bill system. I think this is super important, in part because redemption centers are largely oriented towards the needs of consumers, but not necessarily towards the needs of canners. But we know that canners have a significant role in the system. And so, in order to be able to really establish redemption centers that are appropriate, to the needs of those who are redeeming their containers, we really need to understand the role of canners in the system. Obviously, we'd like to see an increase in the number of cans and bottles that are accepted at redemption centers, or provide some way for more decentralized bulk redemption sites, whatever that might look like. We'd like to see more production of user-friendly materials, including on the rights of canners to the system. We do oftentimes hear about canners, being denied the ability to redeem containers from grocery stores. And we know that those grocery stores are acting in violation, but we don't have, canners really aren't aware of their rights within the system. And so, don't necessarily complain about these issues or work to make it better because they don't necessarily understand, what's acceptable or what's not. And OBRC is definitely getting better at the production of user-friendly materials. It's a very complicated system and can be really hard to train people on the system. And so, yeah, I think continuously improving those materials to understand, the full scope of the system would be very helpful for promoting more inclusion.
Taylor, just to quick heads up, we're almost 45 minutes from the start of the webinar. So just like to keep an eye on the timing and like how we're conducting everything. So
Thank you.
heads up.
Yeah, I'm finished now. We would like to see inclusion provisions be structural, not charity-based. Right, because our People's Depot, for example, is reliant on a grant that's a year-long grant that has to be renewed every year, but it's really difficult for us to invest in this system if we're not necessarily sure that it's going to be renewed year after year. We would like to see the legalization of canning. And then for more information, you can see a case study on Oregon's bottle beer here on the Global Alliance of Waste Pickers site for EPR. So with that, I would like to now turn things over to Latrice Holloway, who is a ground score coordinator and probably one of the most active and amazing canners that I know. She's going to give a presentation about the People's Depot.
Nice to hear me. Thanks, Taylor. My name is Latrice. I live in Portland, Oregon, with my husband and my 2 kids, Jayla and Messiah, and our dog, Happy. I'm a canner, which means I collect cans and bottles and recycle them for income. Canning helped me get off the streets. It took almost 9 years because when I became houseless, I decided that my life was worth fighting for. So I left an abusive relationship with my kid's father. When I left him, I had nothing but the clothes on my back. I said, Lord, how am I going to make it and be able to stand on my own 2 feet? That's when I decided to start canning again. Some canners are houseless and some aren't. In my case, canning eventually became, with canning, I became housed again, eventually became housed again. Canning became my only source of income. Yes, I worked other jobs in retail and grocery stores, but it wasn't as fulfilling as canning is for me. I get to be my own boss. I get to make my own hours, and that means more time with my kids. Because of canning, I feel like I can finally provide for my family in the honest and legal way while living on the street. Us as canners don't have plan B or C. We don't get sick time or unemployment like most. That meant I was facing defeat, and that word is not in my vocabulary. Then the pandemic hit, and it seemed like the world was just shut down. Shut down, that meant all stores was not accepting cans because the state stopped enforcing our bottle bill. The only depot that would take cans were the few ones far in between. And clearly I couldn't have a car back then, so I had to like go on foot. People weren't putting the cans out either, and people looked at us like we were the spreader of COVID-19. So how was we supposed to survive? So that meant canners everywhere just lost the only income that we had, that we depend on to make it from day to day. At least if I was working your everyday job, which not many will hire a houseless African-American girl with a criminal history. That's when Ground Score stepped in and helped our local canners with something called the People's Depot. The People's Depot was created for canners and by canners. We hire canners to sort, count bottles that canners bring in. We pay them in cash right on the spot. We have 2 outdoor sites located in places where a lot of canners live or hang out and where there aren't bottle drops. It's a very low budget setup, but it works. At the end of each shift, we pay our workers in cash, $20 an hour for workers and 25 hours for coordinators. And OBRC comes and picks up the cans and bottles. The system was initially funded by the city of Portland, but now it's funded by OBRC through their grant program. We engage with canners and support them and create community and safe a safe environment for all canners to feel welcome. We understand canners because we are canners and the struggles that they face from day to day. They have support systems and Ground Score. Some of our workers have gotten off the streets thanks to their work with us. We've given them hope to make it another day. We give them encouragement to give back to their community. We believe in them, and even when they don't believe in themselves. People look forward to bringing their cans to us every day. And we give them some of the opportunities to work running the system with their steady shift and more stability. For me, example, I started coming to People's Depot as a canner, then became a worker, and now I'm a coordinator. This job has helped me get housed a car, helped me get a car and establish with different resources and open up a lot of doors for me. I feel like God answered my prayers not only to discover this amazing organization that actually took time to help us canners, but that blessed me with employment. Canners, average, the average hourly earning for canners is $4.96 an hour, compared with Oregon's minimum wage is $12.75. Lack of ID and poor physical and mental health were the two most common barriers canners and have to alternate employment. 60% of canners don't know what they would do for income or would have to beg for money if not for canning. 50% of cans and bottles returned were taken from trash or ground, which means they wouldn't have been recycled. So nationally, there are a few studies that are done in California that found some things like state to state bottle bills see an 11% decline in petty crime. Recycling from canning provides an important resource of income for the urban poor. Recently, Taylor and I were invited to join a state work group to improve the bottle bill. It's the first time that we've known all that the state is including canners in this type of thing. These are some of the things that I like to see happen out of this working group in the system. Long-time support for canners run depots like the People's Depot. Representation and recognition of canners in research, community and policy planning. We want some evidence to show how canners benefit the environment and benefit the community as a whole. Even though we do this as an income, many of us also want to do this to help the environment. People think we do this only to get by, but a lot of us really care about helping the environment and the community. Financial transparency, so we can compare the cost of system like the bottle drop with on People's Depot, and to understand that what they really do with the money they earn from the system. Thank you.
Sorry, I was trying to figure out how to unmute my mic. Okay, great. Thank you so much, Latrice. Now I want to turn to the issue of litter, which is really what originally led to the bottle bill. But that was back in the 1960s when there weren't really very many different types of garbage being littered. Whereas today there are a lot more materials out there, and most of it really doesn't have enough value to be worth it for people like canners to pick up, nor do they have any place to necessarily take it to earn money from it. And this is resulting really in an environmental justice issue and a sanitation crisis, particularly for those who are living on the streets. So I want to turn things over to Barbie Weber here, our ground score coordinator and one of the co-founders of GroundScore. I wanted to know, Barbie, if you can let us know a little bit more about what has happened with garbage in the streets since the start of the pandemic.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Barbara Weber, and I am also a canner and a co-founder of GroundScore Association. And one of the other programs that we do is called Glitter, which is GroundScore Association leading inclusively together through environmental recovery. So GroundScore Association started in 2019, and it was basically around trash collection. In February of this last year, we piloted a project, the Glitter Project. And because of the pandemic and folks that were living outside were not able to go in and get food on a tray, they were basically getting, all their meals through, in boxes, single packaging. Over time, that garbage just began to increase like quadruple, and then also and then April we were still finding cans in the garbage that we were picking up in February, and no one was able to get rid of their garbage. One thing in in Portland, Oregon here is that a lot of businesses, because the garbage service is so expensive, they also lock their garbage cans. So people had no way to get rid of their waste. And not only did the waste increase, but also so did the rat problem, so did smell, so did health problems that could come from those kind of things. And we organized to help to change those things. Originally, we were just going to pick up trash within a grid, which is normal when you're picking up trash, and with engaging people that were living outside. Within just a few months, it transformed into a tent side or RV side or hooch side trash service, just like you would have at your house. We come by. Yes.
Before we jump into the glitter project, can you explain how litter and camp waste was being dealt with before the pandemic, and just explain a little bit why those systems broke down during COVID?
Yes, I can. So the way waste was being dealt with before was a lot of times if waste increased to the point where it was unhealthy, the city would displace those folks on a regular basis so they could clean. Another way that they did it was through volunteer organizations like Solve, and also through prison labor. And those systems broke down during the pandemic because with everyone being in quarantine, and then there were people just not willing to go out and pick up trash. The trash got ridiculous, and those systems, and they did start Solve back up again. And when Ground Score first started, we would lead Solve. Some of our first paid work that we did was leading Solve volunteers to pick up trash. Now the system has completely changed. But yes.
Thank you. So, recognizing this problem of waste building up in the streets during the pandemic, the city of Portland funded Ground Score to start doing this tent side waste collection. So can you tell us just a little bit about how this program works? And I will say too that, Barbie was really the instrumental person who established and developed the system and now manages it.
Well, basically, there's two ways that it happens. Can someone mute their sound there? Thank you. There was two ways that it happened. Okay, we have, Ground Score had been organizing for a little over a year when this project started. So we had people that were working with us. We also started engaging in people that were living outside and offering them jobs. So this also, along with canning, this was life-saving work. We pay workers $20 an hour, and the shifts are only 2 hours, and it's very low barrier. And then also with the added benefit that we are helping our community rid ourselves of all the trash that is out and around, making the environment healthier for us to live in. So it helped the community in ways that are not measured at this point, but there were a lot of people that decided to make different decisions because they have, it's not a hand up, but a hand out. And, now we started out with 4 routes, and now we're up to 23 with the potential of 15 more routes to come. So it's been a very, very exciting time. And how we basically work is we meet people out in the community that are living outside, and we offer them jobs. And so it's kind of location based. Even when we go out to further areas in the city, we hire people that are living in the community right there that we're cleaning. What we found is that it offers, them to have an, agency over their environment, also encourages them to keep their space cleaner. And it's been working wonderfully. When I decided that I was going to start doing this tent side litter thing, and I would be so excited to come back and there were bags already packed like you would on like a garbage truck coming by and picking up garbage. That's all we were doing. We weren't really cleaning their area anymore.
Yeah, tell
They
us
were doing
about
it themselves.
tell
Go
us
ahead.
about that. What has been the impact of this work on the houseless residents and the workers as well who you're hiring?
It's been a big impact. Before, we just recently had a revision in our what we call our campsite regulations, but before that happened, all of the areas, and still mostly most of the areas that we work in, those campers are able to stay in place. They're not being displaced because of lack of getting rid of their garbage. One of our campers, by the slide here, says what they do helps take this the heat and the stress off of us. Help us coming by. They see neighbors getting swept that maybe have refused service, and they're able to stay where they're living. It also has made a dramatic effort, or dramatic in the way that people feel about themselves, around their environment. This is a way to give back to their community, which also is an added benefit because it's a very community based. We're peers, and that makes a huge difference in the way that we approach camps and the way that we approach garbage that are in camps and the types of garbage that is there. We understand what living outside means. A lot of people, we've had several people get into housing from the income, or from the income that they're getting. We still have a considerable amount of people that are living outside, although their lives have improved dramatically too. Our lives can change on a dime, so we kept the shift short, and that a 2-hour commitment is easy for us to do, and it didn't matter if a person what their struggles were, as long as they could pick up trash, then they got opportunity.
So here are some numbers on the work that you've been doing. I know that we conducted a waste audit to kind of see what that breakdown is. And this looks a little bit outdated, right? We have now much more than 15 routes. But I'm kind of curious because, thinking about how to make these types of services more affordable, especially so that other types of, other cities around the world could potentially do this. I'm wondering if you find that when you're more regularly providing tent side collection, are you finding less litter in those areas? Is it making it more affordable for you?
Well, that's what I mean is like they start taking over that process, and all we are doing is gathering bags, weighing those, and getting those ready for a truck to come pick them up. There is no litter. I mean, especially around large encampments, even around in the streets, they'll start picking it up. They'll sweep their areas themselves, even the public access areas. They basically take over the cleaning, and we are there to offer other supportive services. Also camaraderie. There's still large pots of garbage that will come and clean, but a lot of what we do is our wagon is going up and down in front of tents and gathering bags, and maybe sweeping the area to make it even look nicer. But a lot of times, folks have just taken it upon themselves. And also, because we hire within the community, we get there and they're waiting for us to be, they're excited for us to get there. And it is a very community effort. So, people who are on the crew make friends with the people that are living outside, maybe in a different area of them. So it's kind of brought the community of the houseless together in a way that hasn't been before, over an issue that we've been dealing with for years. Back in 2017, I was asking, why don't they pay us to pick up trash? And finally it happened.
So, it's pretty challenging for most cities to fund this kind of service, or at least I think governments say that it is. So I'm just curious if you have any ideas for how this type of work should ideally be funded.
Well, grants are very valuable, but also we had gotten the privilege to become a city contractor. We're working on a contract with the city right now. It will go over the next 3 years. And then, and we also have a new contract with the Joint Office of Homelessness. Contracts are more stable income, and they are coming from the government, but it also can be done by fundraising and other aspects. But contract is the best, is because it's very worthwhile for this to happen, especially if the city is also dealing with the houseless issue, because it is the trauma-informed lens that we offer by being peers. We've seen the decrease in sharps being on the ground, or should I say hypodermic needles. We've also seen the decrease of like I said, food trash and large pots of trash that contribute to the health of everyone living in the community. So, it should be funded for those reasons, and also too that it's life-saving. People change their life and want to have better things for themselves, living outside or inside, things their lives improve.
Great, thanks. And then what about the role of extended producer responsibility? Do you see a role for that here in this program?
Absolutely. I would like to see more items besides just cans and bottles to be redeemed. I read in when they did the audit of the bottle bill, it was said that it was not set up for this type of income, and actually it was a very much more derogatory thing that they said. But this is how we can get. This is very environmentally conscious. Not only are we giving income to folks that are going and cleaning through these items, but they should have more items to get. It should be able to raise that typical hourly wage from under $5 an hour to at least minimum wage. And like certain plastic containers or alcohol, wine bottles, just to open up some of the things that we can keep from going into the landfill. Even the bottles and cans that come to the depot, we're finding that 51% of them could have potentially went there. So including more things in the EPR system is only a benefit to overall environmental consciousness. So
great. Thank you so much, Barbie, for your presentation. So we are going to shift over to our next speaker in a second here. The final point that we just wanted to make is really about the environmental justice angle that we see this taking. I mean, when we think about environmental justice in our waste sector, we oftentimes think about, far off places like Indonesia or Malaysia, where a lot of our garbage or, poorly sorted recyclables are being exported and are polluting communities. But even in countries like the United States that are exporting waste, we also have a really serious environmental justice issue related to trash in our own communities, particularly low-income communities and especially houseless communities. The bottle bill really attempted to solve this problem back in the 1960s and 70s. But now there are just a lot more different types of waste out there. And so we need more ideas out there for how to commercialize these materials so that people can recover it one way or another, whether that be, attaching a price to all materials, or whether that be, making sure that full waste collection, including litter collection and collection in informal settlements, are included under EPR for packaging models, for example. So what I would like to do now is stop sharing my screen and turn things over to Chicago to introduce our next speaker. Thank you so much.
Yes. Thank you, Groundskeeper crew. We will now turn to Rosalind Green, who is the Policy and Program Development Manager with the Metro Regional Government. who will share a bit about their work on equity and inclusion in the waste sector. Rosalind?
Thank you, Chicago, and thank you for hosting me today. I'm going to start sharing my screen and my presentation, and then I will introduce myself. Chicago, can you see my screen? Or Taylor?
Yeah, we can see it.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much. And first, I want to start by thanking Latrice, Barbara, and Taylor for all the work that you do and for sharing your experience. That was an amazing presentation, and it just is so inspiring to hear directly from you about your experience. My name is Rosalind Green, and I'm the Policy and Program Development Manager for what we call Waste Prevention and Environmental Services at Metro, known as WPES. I use she, her pronouns, and just thank you again to Taylor for inviting me here today. My presentation isn't really going to focus on the bottle bill per se, but Metro is a participant on the bottle bill subcommittee that Taylor mentioned. Rather, I'm here to talk today about Metro's 2030 Regional Waste Plan and explain how racial equity was incorporated into the plan and how the focus on racial equity is changing our day-to-day work. So these are the questions that I plan to help answer today. What is the history of the Regional Waste Plan? How was a racial equity lens used to develop the 2030 plan? And the most important question is, how has it impacted Metro's work? So just to kick us off, I want to explain what Metro is. Metro is located in Portland, Oregon, and serves more than 1.5 million people in 3 counties, Clackamas, Multnomah, and Washington County. So the agency boundary encompasses Portland, Oregon, but in addition to 23 other cities located within our region. We're a unique form of government. Regional government isn't as common as it is isn't as common in the US as it is in Europe. The Metro Council is made of a president who's elected region-wide. We also have 6 councilors that are each elected by district. They serve 4 years, and the chief operating officer is hired to carry out the council policies and manage Metro operations. We're also unique in what we manage. We have 1,600 employees and 4 areas of work primarily. We manage 17,000 acres of parks. We plan for new homes, jobs, and transportation options. We uniquely run performing arts centers and the local zoo. And last but not least, I'm here to talk about what we do today in the area of garbage and recycling. Because we manage the systems, the recycling system for the region, including providing informational resources to the community about waste reduction and safe disposal options. So what is the Regional Waste Plan? The Regional Waste Plan is our guiding document for the work that local governments and Metro do collectively in the area of solid waste and recycling, or garbage and recycling. It's both a strategic level plan, and then we also have a blueprint work plan that we use to implement it. So while this plan has a lot of new elements, the planning approach is not new. Metro updates the Regional Waste Plan about every decade, and the 2030 Regional Waste Plan is the 4th of its kind. This is our region's plan to meet our aspirational vision, but it's also fulfills our Oregon statutory requirement for waste reduction planning for the 3 county area, because we are the waste shed rep is what we are called for the 3 counties area. And there's 2 pillars of the plan that I want to talk about. One has been kind of the pillar and traditional in all of our former plans, and the other is new and unique to the 2030 Regional Waste Plan. So environmental impact reduction and mitigation, including climate change, has been a part of most of our plans. The 2030 Regional Waste Plan addresses the full life cycle of products and calls for intervening early in the cycle to reduce the harmful impacts of manufacturing products, because we know that a lot of the environmental impacts don't come at the end of life, but come upstream in the manufacturing and extraction of resources. So traditionally, as I mentioned, the plan is always focused on the environment, but a unique characteristic of the 2030 plan is the second pillar of racial equity. The 2030 Regional Waste Plan is designed to address the historical inequities of the solid waste system related to environmental justice, worker pay, demographics of the workforce, company ownership, and access to services. And the 2030 plan includes 40 actions. There's over 100 actions, but at least 40 of them directly focus on equity and reducing disparities. So why racial equity? In June 2016, Metro adopted the strategic plan to advance racial equity, diversity, and inclusion. And then our department, WPES, also has a racial equity plan specific to garbage and recycling activities. So both of these plans are addressing a history of discrimination and privilege, which I will give an example for solid waste in a moment. And our diversity plans focus on removing barriers for people of color and improving equity outcomes for these communities by improving how Metro works both internally and externally with our community partners and our other stakeholders. We also believe the region is stronger when everyone has access to financial prosperity, a healthy environment, and a range of opportunities that allows everyone to thrive. I think it's important to point out what our racial equity definition is, which you can see on this slide. It's when race can no longer be used to predict life outcomes and outcomes for all groups are improved. And so many of you on the call know this, but inequities appear in a variety of ways in the solid waste system. For instance, the garbage and recycling system tends to lack diversity in the workforce, except in the job categories that pay the lowest. Procurement processes for solid waste contracts often include barriers to minority-owned and women-owned businesses. And communities of color experience barriers to accessing Metro's recycling information, educational services, and household hazardous waste services. So as I mentioned, our plan is designed to address a history of discrimination and privilege that has shaped the Metro's region's programs and policies. So I want to share a brief historical example of discrimination from the region's solid waste system. Here's a picture of the first family-owned garbage companies in the Metro region. The families portrayed here are mostly immigrant families from the Volga region of Russia, who originally came from Germany. And when they settled in Portland in the late 1800s, they built churches, opened bakeries, butcher shops, saloons, and importantly, they started the first garbage collection routes in the region. And here's actually a picture of the members of the local 2020 sanitation union and their families getting together for an annual picnic. And this was actually took place at Blue Lake, which is one of Metro's parks. So now I want to tell you about somebody who tried to buy his garbage truck, but couldn't get a seat at the table. This is Odell and Lila Butler. In this picture, Odell is 91 and Lila was 87. They have since passed in 2015 and 2017, but Odell was a son of a sharecropper in Arkansas and moved to Oregon in 1940 to a not so welcoming community. Odell worked various jobs in the region, and until around 1948, he decided to try to buy a garbage hauling business. He bought a truck, applied for a license from the city, and also applied to join the local 2020 union. The union refused to let him in. They threatened him with violence and told his children and Lila if he persisted, there would be consequences. Odell later ended up leaving the unwelcoming fraternity of the garbage business and became an electrician. And this is just one story of why we are leading with racial equity in our planning at Metro. And I'm sure there's many other stories, but this one we were able to document. So creating the plan, what makes the 2030 Regional Waste Plan unique is both its focus on racial equity, but also how the plan was created. There was an extensive stakeholder engagement that was used to build the plan with an emphasis on community. And this slide summarizes all of the activities that we did with stakeholders to create the plan. The first is the equity work group. We had an equity work group that we created or comprised of community-based members from all different types of community-based organizations. And they were a part of the planning process from beginning to end. It's very important to include people throughout the process and not just at the end. So the equity work group weighed in on every important decision that we made about the plan. And I'll give an example of how their input changed the plan. We also had community forums where we paid people to learn about the solid waste system, take tours, and then we engaged them and asked them what their vision for the system was, and what they would like to see and what isn't meeting their needs. We also did general surveys to survey the general population, and then we had technical work groups that really created the actions in the plan. And so the technical work groups, again, were made of community members, hauling companies. They also include facility operators, local governments, and together each group came up with the actions for each section of the plan. So I want to provide an example of how community engagement helps shape the plan. This slide outlines the elements or sections of the plan. The values serve as the basis for the plan's goals and actions and guide implementation. The vision identifies the desired future for the garbage and the recycling system. And then the goals and actions are designed to close the gap between today and the desired future, or the vision for the future. The indicators, we have a measurement framework that includes measures around equity, and it's really important to us to have a measurement plan that really evaluates the impacts of the plan and highlights where we can be doing better. The principles are circled on this slide because it's an example of how community engagement shaped the plan. The principles were not suggested by Metro as an original element, and they were actually suggested after we came to the equity work group and said, what do you think of the values and vision? And they actually suggested the principles, and we added them verbatim as they provided them to us, because it was really important to us that they stood on their own exactly as the equity work group wrote them. And so they're up on the slide. I'll just pause here for a moment so you can read them. And so, so those principles were key to adding them. We use them throughout now implementation of the plan, and we always come back to them to make sure that we are lifting them and fulfilling those principles. Another important aspect, or another example of how engagement shaped our plan was here on this slide. You see goal areas. We have, and these are kind of the chapters of the plan: shared prosperity, product design and consumption, product end of life, both recycling and garbage management, and then disaster resilience. When we shared the actual plan with our stakeholders, shared prosperity was actually at the bottom of the list, and based on feedback, we bumped it to the top of the list. So these are concrete examples of how we used community engagement to impact and change the plan. So this really is the people's plan in my mind. And so just in terms of the actions and goals around these areas. So again, I mentioned we had 40 actions focused on racial equity. We can send a link to the plan, but they're identified with a green E symbol. And outcomes that we're looking in this area are to improve job diversity, pay, benefits, and pathways. We want to increase the overall share of economic benefit that goes to marginalized communities, access to decision-making and leadership opportunities for youth and adults of color, and then inclusive, culturally relevant education services. In the area of reducing health and environmental impacts, our goals and actions are designed to reduce health and environmental impacts across the product life cycle, as I mentioned, both at the beginning and the end of life. So outcomes that we're looking for are better purchasing options and more reuse and repair opportunities. Reuse and repair is a huge opportunity, area of opportunity for us that we need to invest more in. And we're also looking to minimize impacts from system operations, which is really the environmental justice aspect of our work. And last but not least, we want to maintain and improve our garbage and recycling system. And outcomes in this area are improved collection services for residents. Our focus for this area are people living in condos and apartments, and also people who are experiencing homelessness. We have a blue bag program. Barb described a bag program. Metro has a similar one. We also are trying to create a more adaptable and resilient recycling system, which I'll talk a little bit more about, and then disaster debris management, because we're increasingly, like many people in the world, experiencing more natural disasters, and debris management is a key aspect of being resilient following a disaster. So in closing, I want to provide you with some specific examples of how racial equity is changing our work and the work that we do at Metro. So first, we're really looking at reducing the number of temporary employees, including prison labor used by Metro. So Metro owns and operates a Metro paint facility, and Metro paint is manufactured from recycled latex paint. And until recently, we were using temporary workers for staffing at this facility. Recently, we received approval from council to transition the contracted staff, and we'll be shifting 12 positions from contract to regular status with benefits. They will be Metro employees. In addition, we're making several changes to support workforce equity for these folks, in addition to some of the other positions in our work. And so we're looking at improving professional development opportunities. We're really looking at scheduling procedures to reduce injuries, and also updating classifications to create job pathways into other careers within the solid waste industry. Let's see. We also have our RID program, which tackles the problem of dump garbage and litter on public property and provides cleanup services. The RID program continues to grow in staffing because of the issues that Barb was covering in her presentation. There's a huge demand for cleanup services. And previously, and during the pandemic, and also since October 2020, the RID program has continued to examine its relationship with police and use of incarcerated labor. So we stopped using incarcerated labor right around the beginning of the pandemic, and we're growing, and we're creating a career development program through RID, so that we can staff work crews with people that have experienced barriers to entering the workforce, and we also work with community-based organizations to staff our crews. Let's see. And we're focusing on priority materials such as sharps and medication collection. And we're also prioritizing service areas that have historically been underserved. So really looking at how we deploy those services and making sure it's equitable. I also want to talk about what we did with the passing of Oregon's Recycling Modernization Act. So we recently, in this year in Oregon, passed extended producer responsibility for all of the materials that we put in our mixed blue bin. So in Oregon, we mix everything together, paper, plastic, and metal, and then we put glass on the side. So everything that goes into our blue bin is now going to be covered by the Oregon Recycling Modernization Act, and that's an extended producer responsibility model. So with the passage of this Recycling Modernization Act, Metro was at the table from beginning to end, and our number one priority was to ensure that this bill included elements of equity and good job provisions for workers. So there is an equity study and equity provisions in the bill. And similar to this bill, we will continue to advocate for equity with any of our legislative work that we do. So this is an exciting bill for Oregon, but we also want to ensure everyone benefits from it, both on an employment level, opportunities for economic opportunities, and also access to services. Community representation on the Regional Waste Advisory Committee. We have a Regional Waste Advisory Committee, kind of like the Equity Committee, that's guided the work that we do. And now this committee includes 3 individuals representing interests of communities of color and other historically marginalized groups. So really making sure that the folks that are making decisions and weighing in are from community-based organizations. We've also passed a regional service standard for multifamily communities, which means that the regional service standard sets the baseline of services for all government recycling collection programs in Portland. And we've updated the requirement to include apartments and condos, because previously it was only targeted at people living in single family homes. And this new requirement will include color standards for bins and regularly occurring service for bulky waste or large oversized items. The last thing I want to highlight is we've increased equity requirements for grant programs and also increased grants to minority-owned businesses. And so we provide money through a number of different means to community groups. And one thing I want to highlight is that we actually did provide seed money and support to Ground Score. And Taylor has said that this has been critical to their startup, and because it was early in the process. So we really want to make sure that these grant programs prioritize equity and advance equity within our system. So I will stop sharing. That's all I have. Thank you again for having me today, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Chicago, you're on mute.
Oh, okay. Thank you to all the presenters. Really appreciate it. I am now going to take some questions. I hope that there are some canners out there who have questions. We'll be taking questions in the chat, and also, especially if you are a canner or a waste picker, please feel free to raise your hand and speak your question. Okay? Anyone?
And you can say if there's no
Okay,
questions, there's ones from the chat.
Okay, from the chat, we got a question from Kendall Christensen, who asked, how is canning currently illegal in Oregon?
I guess I can answer that one. Canning is not illegal in Oregon, but it is illegal in Washington, Vancouver, Washington, which is right above us, but it's not illegal in Oregon.
Yeah, so return of cans and bottles is not allowable in Washington, but it is allowable in Oregon. But actually picking from like curbside waste bins is technically illegal. And even picking from, public waste bins, you technically need explicit permission from whoever owns those waste bins in order to pull from them. And canners at large don't have permission from the city of Portland, for example, to pick from public waste bins. So it is technically illegal. Barbie, did you want to add to that? I saw your hand up.
I was just going to talk about that, but we have made some progress. We advocated to keep the bins unlocked, and it seems as though once that's going to happen, because a lot of the new bins that they have are locked, and they're dangerous because you can't actually see into the can. So, but that's what I was going to say. It's illegal to pick through people's trash, and that's a lot of the canning here in the city of Portland goes on through the middle of the night for those reasons.
Thanks, Barbie. Yeah, we've done some advocacy with the city of Portland specifically, and they have agreed to keep new public bins unlocked due to that advocacy. It's not very much enforced, though, the illegality of canning, and the city of Portland is working to try to actually get this changed to allow for specifically the collection or the picking of bottle bill, containers that are covered under the bottle bill.
Yes, Martin Borst.
Thank you.
I'm killing your last name. I hope not. Martin?
It's Bork, like Torque. Thanks for this presentation. Really great information. Kudos to you guys for all your organizing and success. I lead a nonprofit curbside recycling program in Berkeley, California. We're the first curbside collection program in the country, and we still do that under contract with the city of Berkeley. We're a zero waste advocate and support your efforts, and right next door to us is a redemption center under the California bottle bill program. And we often, we have a lot of canners in the area who collect from residential cans and carts. And, usually our approach to that, even though it is technically illegal, is as long as they're not driving a truck and sort of compete and paying employees and kind of competing against our union employees at that scale, it's sort of, a don't ask, don't tell. Most of the issues that come up around it are around noise complaints and fear of, xenophobia in the neighborhood of like, who's this person in my neighborhood in the middle of the night making noise and that kind of thing. And so, it just kind of depends, but we are looking at national bottle bill legislation and how to address this issue, because the recyclers, the industry that we're in, typically opposes bottle deposit systems because they feel it's removing an important revenue stream from them. And so I just was wondering if you guys have been thinking about like both the legality aspect of that, as well as kind of the cost or pricing. That revenue offsets the cost of garbage collection for residents. So sometimes they feel like, hey, I'm sorting this stuff out and then somebody else is getting the revenue and then I have to pay again. So I'm just wondering if there's any thinking or discussion around that, and how, what kind of official, because like I said here, we handle it unofficially, but in an official structure that might work with regards to this issue of, so the private ownership of recyclables.
Roz, are you interested in taking that one?
Yeah, I have, I think there is, it's hard to answer this question. Because your question specifically is, can you repeat it? Just if
there's any thought about structurally, if you were to reform the Oregon bill to try and make it more legal for canners to collect from residential programs, or if you're thinking about a broader structure, like how does that work in the context where, the formal structure says that's private property, and that once it's in the can, it's the hauler's property, and now and the haulers, depending on that revenue, to offset the cost of collection to the resident, and now there's a third party, the canner, who's taking from that. And and this is the opposition that we run into in policy arenas when the big waste companies come in and say, well, you can't take our money, and then we have to charge more to the residents, and then the residents say, well, we shouldn't be paying more. And so that's been historically a big obstacle to passing more bottle deposit systems.
Yeah, it's a really complex issue, and it's hard to know where to start with. We've had companies in town too that have had businesses, especially for multifamily communities, that'll offer services to property managers to come in and go through the garbage to take out recyclables so they don't have to pay higher garbage rates. That is completely different. I think you're alluding to this, what the laws are designed for and what they're not designed for. And so I think that the bottle bill doesn't have a law per se specific to it about going into containers. The law stands in and of itself. And we haven't really focused on this issue in recent years. So that's why it's hard for me to answer the question, but I hear you in that there's definitely differences in what the law was designed for and what it wasn't designed for. And so, for my own personal you know, I have a canner that I have a relationship with at my house, and I hide a container in front of our car so that the canner knows where to find it and she doesn't have to go through our garbage. So I think there are strategies like that to, you know, while the law is in place. I don't think we're enforcing that law for canners as far as I know. That's a local government kind of jurisdictional thing. But, you know, there are ways to kind of, I think at the community level to kind of work around that, you know, in my case. So I hope that answers your question, but yeah.
No, I really appreciate it. And it's a super hard and complicated issue that no one has seemed to crack yet. So I was just, you guys are so innovative and on the cutting edge of this. I just wanted to hear if there had been any thoughts, you know, even just changing our language here in Berkeley, historically, that's been called poaching.
Yeah.
And it is illegal, but there's no enforcement. And so we've even just tried to stop calling it poaching, you know, and call it informal collection or something else. And so, yeah, tough issue. And thanks for your thoughts on it and great work, everybody.
And I did see Peter jump on.
I was just going to say, I see Peter with his video on. Peter from Oregon Department of Environmental Quality and who has a lot of history with Oregon's bottle bill. Yeah. Probably more of an expert than any of us. If you want to take a shot at it, Peter, go ahead.
Well, actually, I just want to point out there's a really big difference between California's law and Oregon's law. In California, the recycling collectors, you know, the garbage and recycling companies can collect the deposits from the materials they pick up. That is not true in Oregon. The only value that the material has for the collection programs here is the scrap value of the aluminum and the plastic itself, which of course is a lot less than the 5 cents per container that you have down there in California. So it hasn't been as big of an issue. The garbage haulers here have not pushed for that so strongly. And also because we adopted our law so early, back in 1971, there was no curbside recycling back then. So it never really changed from that standpoint. The processors here have always known that they're going to get very little aluminum, very little plastic in the curbside programs from the bottle bill, because that material has always been going back to the stores, you know, in large bulk.
Thank you, Peter. TT has her hand up too. Are you wanting to contribute, TT, Latrice?
Yes, I was gonna say something about that. It's different from like California because they basically any container has a value to it. It's something like in Oregon, canners just goes for the cans and bottles, and pretty much that's you know that excludes everything else in recycling bin compared to Oregon, where every container has a value to it. So that's why, you know, it's different from there to here. And the community is worried about, you know, who's taking what, who's money is what, because in Oregon, people parents just want the bottles and cans. Everything else is just, you know, they can have. So that's what I want to say.
Anyone else has any questions? If not, then I'll like to ask one. We're not allowed to use vehicles to collect our cans and bottles. Is it the same in Oregon and California?
Yeah, no, we're allowed to use our vehicles because, I mean, mostly, well, 9 out of 10 people are mostly don't have cars, but we are allowed to use our cars to go canning.
Wow. Okay. That's impressive. That's good because we aren't.
That's I've never heard that before, but wow, that's crazy.
Makes a little bit of sense from the other side of it. It does, because if we cannot use vehicles, we cannot collect as much. So
right. And you can collect more when you have somewhere to store it instead of having to store it on a bike,
right,
or, you know, a cart and stuff like that, you know, so you can make more money. Yeah, so that's, yeah.
Is that a problem for you out there, storage spaces?
Yes, well, we have
You got into mute again, TT. You're cutting out a little bit.
No, she's muted.
You're on mute, Latrice.
I can speak to California real quick on that. People use vehicles. There is a whole informal sector in vehicles with trucks that collect cardboard. They run and newspaper and other materials that are not don't have redemption value, and also redemption value, but they run into the same issues of like what's public and what's private. They usually have some kind of agreement with the business owner. They're mostly collecting from businesses. And then as far as storage goes, people do have informal recycling yards where they're storing and sorting. That gets enforcement comes down on them around public health issues and zoning. So it's sort of about how big a scale, and if they're doing it in a residential neighborhood, that's when there's enforcement on those sort of informal recycling yards.
Yeah, Barbie, I think you have maybe some contribution here. You know well this issue.
Well, we do struggle with storage. You know, we have at our site, we have one, storage container that we use, and OBRC comes to pick up every day, which kind of helps with that. Although our storage container is only so big, so it limits the amount of glass that we can take. We have a 300 container limit typically, to be fair and equitable to the community members bringing in cans. Unfortunately, we only have like a $5 limit, which is like, was it 50 containers with the glass currently. So because there is a storage space issue with there, we have to box those before they go back to OBRC, so they're safe. And so, yeah, the storage we can't take as much because of the lack of storage space. We're hoping to fix that in the near future, but right now it still is a part of the struggle.
Yeah, and for independent canners on the street, we also know that, I mean, people will sometimes they'll have like tents located in different parts of the city where they'll store materials inside those tents and just hope that nobody takes them. And that in part has to do with the fact that you can only return so many containers at any given retailer or bottle redemption site. And so they might, kind of meet their maximum and then store them overnight and try to go return more the next day.
Any other questions? Anyone? Feel free. Sam Pierce, I think his name. Am I saying that right? Sam Pierce?
Seems good.
Okay. Where is he? Oh, okay. And he asked, are folks in Oregon able to share how the experience of canning changed when the deposit went up to 10 cents?
I can for myself. So when the price raised to 10 cents, it was, like getting double for your money. Also, though, a little bit of the competition for cans and canning routes also became a big deal, though, because it was so much more value, there was so much more money left out on the ground or in the garbage. So there was the transition period was a bit rough as people, some people already had their canning routes and it was like, okay, well, I'm making double now. But that also increased the folks that were going out and canning. Oh, I'm going to go out and can now, so it helped in the way that, we don't have as many containers on the street. But it also improved lives. I mean, we went, I was living in a camp in the woods, and our only income was basically canning. And we and that was another thing that we had was storage issues. But every one of us were responsible to bring in so much canning. And for the first little bit, it was like, okay, well, now I don't have to work as hard because I only need to make this much. So it was only need to go out this much now. So it did have a huge impact in the way that our communities kind of work together. It was a rough at first, a little bit, and then it has gradually increased our livability with canning. So yeah, the 5 cents made a huge difference, huge difference.
There you go.
Okay. Amy, could you hear? Amy,
Hi. Yes.
Hi.
Hi. Thanks, Chicago. This is Amy Gilson. I'm with a California-based organization called Californians Against Waste. And first, just want to thank you for this presentation. It's been really, really useful to hear about what you're doing up in Oregon. I have a couple questions. One is around the challenges that canners in Oregon face when they're trying to find places to redeem. One of the issues that we have here in California is that we've seen a lot of recycling centers close in the past few years, and that's made it harder for folks, anyone, canners or folks like myself, to find somewhere to take bottles. You have to travel further. And I'm wondering whether that's a barrier also in Oregon, or because your system is set up a little differently, if there's generally somewhere nearby where canners can take cans to. And the challenge is really on, Taylor, I think you mentioned that there are limits to the number of cans that can be redeemed. So it's kind of a different challenge from what we've been talking about, or the conversations I've been in here in California. And then the second thing is, I was interested in sort of a combination of having somewhere like the People's Depot and the, I think, Barbara, you were talking about actually doing this like mobile trash, like a trash service, tent-side trash service. And I was curious whether, like, what you think about like the potential use or practical application of doing a sort of bottle pickup, like tent-side bottle pickup. Here again, thinking a little bit about the California context where we have some pilots that are doing mobile bottle or mobile redemption centers. And it seems, I'm just curious if that's something that would be feasible or useful in the context in which you're working. Thank you.
Well, a lot of people depend on the income. So like if we're cleaning like through streets or throughout the bushes or something like that, and when we come upon a can, typically we'll leave it exactly where it is. We clean up everything around it and we leave that container for someone to get. When we're in the camps, a lot of people that live outside are canners, so it really they're not wanting to give up that income, and if we collect now, not some routes, people will collect cans as we go and not specifically in areas of camps, unless it's somebody that doesn't recycle. And we do have people that don't recycle bottles and cans, and they've started holding their bottles and cans until somebody from our crew that they know comes by and they pick it up. But a lot of times, that's so that's the kind of the barrier in providing something like that is, and I forgot the first part of your question.
So the first part was around the barriers to find somewhere to actually redeem. So kind of, is there enough coverage of sites where canners can go that they don't have to go too far?
I want to talk about, okay, there's opportunities to take your cans in. But when you get there, it's the treatment that you receive and the absolute disrespect that I personally have. I'm waiting in line to turn my cans in, and we are the least priority on, like, we have one place that in downtown Portland, we would take our cans, and if a person, even no matter what, we were the last priority in the customer service because it was ran by their customer service department. Even in the middle of counting our cans, they would stop us so they could deal with whatever, anybody coming to the counter. The People's Depot made it possible for people to come to a place where they receive dignity and respect. And it's also, our limitations are we can only handle so much right now, right? But even taking bottles and cans, and I've not ever taken to the big commercial ones, so Latrice would have to speak to that. But I've heard the same thing is that, there's lines and long, hours of standing outside and weather, very hot, very cold, whatever. And then when you get in there, it's not like people are smiling at you and treating you all the time with respect, right? And so it's also that piece of it, because I think, I personally stopped wanting to even return my cans because of the way I was treated, right? So I would give my friend, $5 to take my cans. I'd split it with them, so there's that piece of it that comes, and then just the stigma of going through trash cans and stuff like that. People don't have respect for our line of work, so it's an education in what that is. So,
And that's why we the People's Depot, that's why we're like, since our sites are inside, like in the community, it's also, good for the neighbors to see the houseless community actually doing something positive. So, when they see that, they want to actually, help. So so we are seeing more cans out. Surprisingly, we are seeing more cans out every week. And the fact that the People's Depot, like we said, is canners run by canners, we're canners for canners. And so when you go to the bottle drop and stuff, they don't understand, or the struggle, or they don't understand where we're coming from. So it's just a paycheck to them, but to us, this is more than a income. This is our life. This is what we get up for every day. This is how we support ourselves. This is how everything is canning is everything to us, and they don't understand that. And as far as like the mobile canning thing, it will be good for us, because with some residents that don't want to see canners go in their recycling bins and stuff, then they will have that option to actually call and and have us come out there and pick their recycling up if they don't want canners to go in the recycling bin. So they still have a chance to actually still recycle there and have us pick them up, instead of having the canners go through the recycling bins. But to me, that's the only reason, good thing about having a mobile. If we did have a mobile car thing for the canners.
Taylor? Yes. Should I wrap it up now?
The time, sure. I don't see any more questions.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, everyone who participated. Taylor, thank you for the wonderful invitation. I'll do it again in a minute. Less problematic, though. That's all the time we have for today. So if you have additional questions or entered a question that wasn't answered, you can email them to Taylor, or you can put her contact in the chat. Now we will hand things over to Eduardo from the Global Alliance of Waste Pickers, who will make a couple of announcements and upcoming events. And thank you once again for joining us all today. Thank you, everyone. Have a good one.
Thank you so much, Chicago. Eduardo dropped off and asked me to just close things up today. This is the fourth in our series, the series of the Global Alliance of Waste Pickers on extended producer responsibility. Probably in a couple of months, we might restart them with several new case studies. But we do have other events in the pipeline next Thursday at the painful hour of 6 a.m. Pacific or 9 a.m. Eastern. The Global Alliance of Waste Pickers is going to have an event on climate change. So the first part of it will be stories from waste pickers around the world with their experiences with climate change. And the next part of the webinar will be actually the release of a greenhouse gas calculator and methodology that has been developed to enable waste picker organizations to be able to calculate their greenhouse gas mitigation or their greenhouse gas offsets that come from their work. And so stay tuned. If you follow the Global Alliance of Waste Pickers on social media, you can check that out there. I'm getting some questions in the chat here on how we can see the recordings. We will paste the recordings on, let's see, the website of the Global Alliance of Waste Pickers. They do have a website that's dedicated to EPR, and I'm just going to post that really quickly here in the chat for everybody. There you go. So stay tuned for our work for the recordings, as well as case studies and other content, workers' education content that the Global Alliance of Waste Pickers has been developing for waste, ideally, oriented towards waste pickers on the subject of extended producer responsibility. Thanks so much, everybody, for joining us. And thank you, Chicago, for moderating this so gracefully.